Hello and welcome to the 1Q podcast by Blueprint, where we discuss what we think is the next wave of innovation for technology and businesses. This is a podcast where we ask our guests the one burning question about the future of digital transformation. Hello and welcome to another episode of the 1Q podcast, where we discuss the next wave of innovation in technology and businesses. I'm your host, Ryan Neal, president of Blueprint Technologies, and today we have on our show Mr. Tom Hallstrom. Tom, say hi to the audience and tell a little bit about yourself, what you do.
Hey everybody, I am a director of client development here at Blueprint. Been here about 4 years, started as a solution architect, building things, and now have transitioned unexpectedly into building teams rather than just technology.
That's awesome. Yeah, Tom has been with us for a while, and so he's seen us grow and change and transform. And so that's why we have him on the podcast today to talk a little bit about what he thinks is cool and the next wave of innovation. So one of the unique things about Tom and I that we have in common is we actually both play music. What other creative stuff that are you into outside of the workplace?
I think growing up, there were two things that I did all the time that I never expected to be part of or impactful to my career. My dad was a finish carpenter for about 20 years, so I was constantly doing high-end custom homes, woodworking projects with him, and also playing in a band. He also was a touring musician. The whole reason he got into the finish carpentry and cabinet making trade was because he wanted to build his own amplifiers.
Oh, that's awesome.
And both of those things, both working with my hands, and having tactile work product and creatively making music with people, I've done since I was a kid, and like I said, never expected insights from either of those worlds to impact what I do career-wise, professionally, technologically, but they certainly do.
Yeah, and we talk about that a lot. Tom and I engage in this kind of dialogue around the parallels between not only the music creation, but also art, anything creatively, how it impacts the rest of your world and improves the rest of your world. Do you have some practical examples of that you want to give?
Yeah, one aspect of my own music making process is my dad, was in touring bands, owns a studio now, and so when my own band, which was always evolving, different people from high school or college, we were looking for a guitar player to record an album, and I realized the best guitar player I knew was my own dad. And so he became not just engineer and producer, but a band member. And it's interesting, on one hand, it's very un-rock and roll to have your own dad in the band, but what it forced us to do to set aside roles and our hats, yes, he was my dad, yes, he was musical mentor. When it comes to the band, though, I'm the band leader. And that setting aside ego and maybe what your historical role was, and everybody comes to the table, comes to rehearsal saying we want to create the best song, the best performance, the best album, the best show, best recording we can. It's been really interesting seeing how I also have a number of brothers and friends in the band where you really set aside a lot at the door and you come as equals ready to create. And I think what that has taught me when approaching a project, really of any kind, technology or non-tech, it's easy to want to protect your position and hold on to it when you start this creative endeavor, this solutioning process, and it's risky. And oftentimes we try to hedge our bet against the risk by protecting our role, and I think it really inhibits the creative process. And so having those kind of people in the band, for me, has really been a good reminder of how you approach a problem like this with open hands.
Well, it's awesome. The role in a band as a band leader and a role in a company or a role in a project is also real similar. So that is a great segue into the 1Q of the day. Is how do you as a leader in a company create an environment where the creative process can be facilitated? And is there parallels between the creative process when it comes to music, art, and then also the creative process that exists within business and technology that you see?
I think two very important aspects. It's a different scenario when you're creating art for the love of it, and then you're creating art because you've got a patron, which really you could consider, your clients, your patrons. They've got an expectation. They want your mind, your creativity, but they've paid for something and expect something at the end of the day.
Right.
And so those are, higher tension, higher risk scenarios than just creating with a blank canvas. And if you walk away empty-handed, that's okay. We'll try again tomorrow.
It's the record label that comes and says, I need 10 songs done within 3 months, and you haven't started any of them.
Yes.
How do they not become clinical and formulaic? How do they become inspired?
And I there's a million quotes online about, where you get your inspiration, or is it inspiration or perspiration? And, I strike, when the muse strikes, then I'm creative. And what I think you can learn is create spaces for experimentation and innovation that are lower risk in a company. When for me, playing music since I was a kid, you're able to create with no risk. You're playing for a teen center. Nobody's showing up but your mom and a few kids who are lost, right? And you go home and maybe you're embarrassed or maybe you're really thrilled, but it's pretty low risk. But you start flexing and training those muscles of, how do I respond to a crowd that loves the music? How do I respond when I'm heckled? How do I respond when one person in the band forgets equipment or forgets their part, or the vibe is just all wrong? And as you practice that for years and get used to it, then you're able to, when it comes, showtime and you're playing something pretty legit, you've practiced how to operate in those scenarios. And I think in a business sense, carving out space for your team to be creative and kind of do passion projects, side projects, and take those learnings, make sure you take time to assess what worked and what didn't. Then you've got you're not just practicing when you're in front of a client, you're practicing on your own, and then coming, for game time, you've done your homework.
What's when you're creating some environment like that, do you what's your perspective on like creating artificial constraints, or like how you create an environment where people are challenged enough, but then also they get comfortable with like failing as well at the same time?
Ooh, so that was my second point. Couple thoughts on that. One, encouraging risky behavior, which can be tough. You got to have a team that you trust. But I have a friend who's pretty extreme. He runs his own company. He says, reward colossal failure and punish mediocre success.
That's awesome.
Which is pretty hyperbolic, but that kind of approach, which is if we know exactly how this is all going to turn out, you're going to start losing the attention of people who want to be right in the middle of a challenge. So understanding risk and how to carefully curate and allow it. But I also think, we say often here, creativity loves constraint. Constraint create, what it forces you to do in the moment has created some amazing art. I mean, we talk a lot about the Keith Jarrett concert in Germany, and you show up and you have these expectations. I mean, when you get to a certain level of performance, while master craftsmen can work with just about any tool, you get to a certain level where you can expect a legit stage and a quality sound system and a stage manager who knows what they're doing. And
well, you're also like you're on show 35 of a 50-leg tour, and you show up and you want to get through it, right? How do you stay inspired at that point when you know everything like the back of your hand?
When it's a well-oiled machine.
Right, exactly.
And Jarrett, in that case, was presented with a janky piano. He's got a demanding, expectant audience who, have come to expect a certain level of quality of performance, and he's left with a fairly inferior tool. Mm-hmm. And when you encounter that kind of obstacle, there's all kinds of ways you can respond. You can throw a fit and say, I refuse. Say that you got, sick and bow out of the show, or you can choose to dive headlong into the problem. And the people who choose to do that often come up with the most gold. I mean, in that case, it's a highly sought after live recording because you feel his strain and his pull, and he's having to, a lot of things that are just rote muscle memory. You know the equipment's going to perform a certain way. You've got to adapt in the moment, and that spark of creativity and freshness comes out in that recording, and that's why we share it all the time in company meetings, because I think there's a lot to be learned from that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's cool. Anything else to add? If you have to give like one big piece of advice to the listening audience about how they can create that type of environment within their companies, what would you give them?
I take this from working with my dad as a kid, but constantly evaluate your toolbox. It is very easy to rely on the same tools over and over, and using the same tools can force you into the same habits of creativity, of creation, but they can also limit you. You're not adding anything new, and it's riskier. It takes more effort to learn something new. But for me, forcing myself to use a new tool, a new methodology, a new approach, maybe even new people, take out the people I fully rely on, and build up that next level of leader and see what they've got in them, and not just do what I've resorted to habitually, I think is really important. And making sure that as you're leading your company, you are giving your people space to experiment, to learn and grow. A lot of the situations that me, you, anyone listening to this podcast, you grow the most when you're very uncomfortable, you're put into a situation that you feel you're unqualified for, and you pony up and you figure it out, and you stretch and learn and grow. Totally. And if all you want is predictability, you're going to always marginalize those opportunities that are a little more risky, but that's where you grow. You would generate that environment that creates that mediocre success. Exactly. Well, that's awesome. I really appreciate you coming on the show today. If anybody wants to get in touch with you or follow your thought leadership, what's the best way to get in touch with you? You can send me an email, thomas@bpcs.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Thomas Hallstrom, Hallstrom. And if you also want to soundtrack your commute home, hallstromband.com. You can listen to our whole record for free. And if you got questions or good music to share or challenges, we'd love to hear from you. Awesome. Thanks for having me on. That's great. You definitely. As always, thank you all for listening. And be sure to tune in next week where we feature another one of our thought leaders, people that we think are absolutely innovative in the tech space. Thanks for coming on the show, Tom. Thank you.